Hey, David, thank you so much for hanging out with us today.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. I've already described in a little brief interlude the book in my briefest words possible. But for anyone who is unfamiliar at this point with your book All Day is a Long Time, how would you how would you just describe it? What's your elevator pitch basically for someone who's interested in the book?
Yeah, I'm really bad at the elevator pitch. My agent told me I needed to work on it when I was trying to pitch the book, and it was a big thing for me. But it's a pseudo-autobiographical book about a young man in Florida who struggles with drug addiction among other things, and he's just trying to kind of get some footing in the world, trying to uh, latch onto something true, something that he can believe in, and it's kind of about his um, the trouble he has finding something like that. Um, and I tried to kind of differentiate it from some other this style of book, just through the the style in which it's written and the prose. I paid a lot of attention to that and sort of sometimes let the story kind of go. So
That's cool.
yeah,
I like that elevator pitch. I mean, it might have been 17 floors, but I would have ridden those 17 floors with you.
yeah. I'm not good at it, man. I'm telling you.
No, I'm not saying that as a diss. I'm actually saying that as a compliment.
Thank you.
um, well, how are you? I mean, usually I get to go to the Young Lions Book Awards in New York, so I get to meet all of the finalists. And this year I was not able to be there. How was that? How was that night? Was it cool? Was it? I mean, I feel like you've won a lot of awards, so maybe it's not as I don't know, intimidating as it might seem.
It was really cool. It was quite intimidating, but I was really excited. The book, it came out in COVID obviously is still going on, but
Oh wow, yeah,
things were really shut down, so I didn't get to do much by way of like actually going places, you know. I
yeah.
did uh I did quite a few virtual events and virtual interviews and stuff, but it was nice to get out of the house, like get on a plane, fly to New York, and just kind of meet other writers and celebrate this book with them and their books and
Yeah.
meet a lot of people. It was a really great experience.
Where is home for you? Or unless you don't want to say, I don't want to ask like,
I li I'll tell you, I live in Tampa, Florida.
Oh, nice. All right. So it must have been that's nice. Have you been to that branch of the New York Public Library before? The sort of big library?
Yeah, yeah, I've been in the building. I've never been like a special guest, so that was nice.
Yeah. It's a nice
Just
way to it's a nice way to arrive at the at the giant library.
Yeah,
That's
it
great.
was really surreal, really cool experience.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, it's been such a pleasure like getting to read all of the finalists. It's such an interesting, very diverse group of books. But
Yeah,
I genuinely, I mean, I really mean this. Like I and my husband can concur because he was next to me as I was reading. I was really just I just was so captivated by this book. It's interesting because I've directed an episode of Euphoria in the first
mhm,
season, and I don't know if you've seen the show at all, but obviously it deals with some similar themes in terms of addiction and things like that. And so I had done a tremendous amount of research for that project, and I just felt like this flew off the page in a way that was so visceral and intimate, and I really, really cared for David in a way where I don't know. I think it's hard sometimes when someone isn't an addict to understand what the internal how different an addict's internal life is from their external presentation. And
yeah.
I found that to be really emotional and compelling and just beautifully done. So that's my ass kissing for the interview.
Thank you very much. Yeah, actually, I like I watched Euphoria and I actually liked it even though I thought I was gonna hate it. Like,
Yeah.
I typically dislike fiction, as strange as it is to say, like,
Yeah.
books that deal with drug addiction, even though I just wrote one, like, I typically, like, I can't look at it,
Yeah.
and I used to tell my agent, like, I would never pick this book off the shelf, like my own book.
Wow. That's amazing though. Like that's incredible. Like you wouldn't read the book cover of your own book and decide that you wanted to
Ye
read it.
Yeah, I mean, maybe some of the stuff like, "Oh, David lives in Tampa," I'd be like, "This is spooky," um, but yeah, like, in general, I think if I this is a bizarre thought experiment, but if I didn't write it, I think I would like it if I read it, but I don't think I would ever read it.
I feel like though all you would need to do is read the first couple pages and you'd be like, this guy's a really good writer. I should read
Yeah.
this.
Hopefully. Sometimes
that's that's
sometimes if
my
I'm in a
guess.
bad mood, I don't wanna give the credit.
Oh man. But you've been published before, correct? Am I
This is my first novel. I wrote it while I was in, graduate school.
Oh, wow. And were you in graduate school for literature or you were just in
Yeah,
okay,
for fiction, for creative writing at the University of Miami.
for fiction which you don't like to read or watch?
No, I like fiction, I just don't like stuff that deals with, drug
Oh,
addiction.
right, right. Well, I guess I mean, yeah, to go back to the Euphoria comparison, like I did feel like this was the first time I read a novel that had the same sort of empathy and sort of intimacy that I felt like that show
Yeah,
really approaches. It was obviously I know Sam Levinson, the creator of the show really well. And I think that he's been through some similar things. So I think that he's kind of tapped into that place that you tapped into in this book in terms of how to really help a reader or an audience member really experience that internal life, which is um just
yeah.
heartbreaking. What was the journey for you to starting to write? Like was there like an aha light bulb moment of like I'm gonna be a novelist or what was that? What did that look like for you?
For me, it was I was like late to go to college. I dropped out of high school. Once I had my life started to get a little bit more manageable, I got my GED and I started taking community college classes. I started going to the University of South Florida here in Tampa,
Hmm.
and I was like, you know, I felt behind, so I was like, I'm gonna go try and become a doctor. Like I was pretty good at school. I was like, I can do this, you know.
It's
I just gotta
amazing.
I just gotta try and do it. Because mostly just because I know that doctors make money. And I was like, I don't know what else I can do. And then I started taking, some literature classes. A friend of mine, he was like, man, I'm taking this poetry class with this poet Jay Hopler, who sadly passed away last year.
Mm,
And he was raving about the class, and I was like, all right, I'll check it out because I like to read. Um, and when I took that class, man, it really opened my eyes. It had me thinking about stuff in a completely different way. And then, give me 2 semesters and I'm fully out of the hard sciences, not taking any more of those classes. It's just all writing all the time. And yeah, it was really cool. And then when I was applying to graduate programs, I couldn't decide between fiction and poetry
hmm.
because I really liked writing poetry.
Yeah.
But I got into more fiction programs than I did poetry programs. So I was like, man, maybe I'm just better at one than the other, and I should just listen to that.
Sorry, you can make your fiction poetry. That's all right.
Yeah, you can blend it, and they do the same thing. They do prose poetry.
Yeah, they
So
steal
yeah,
from you guys, so you can steal from them.
mhm, yeah, it's a
Um,
nice.
that's amazing though to hear about like a teacher that could make that big of an impact. Both my parents are teachers as well, so I grew up in a household of educators,
Mhm.
and it's incredible to hear that you could come in with such a different intention and just have someone kind of completely light something up in you that's like, yeah, that's what I want to be. That's what I want to do. Was there something in particular in that course that you felt like
Um,
was that thing?
I I think I mean, so he was a really like, first and foremost, he was a really talented poet,
Mm,
and when I read his poetry, I was pretty blown away, but
yeah.
even before that, the stuff he had us reading, was a lot to do with the readings he was having us do. We read a book that's about the craft of poetry called The Triggering Town,
Ooh.
and it like I said, it just kind of had me thinking about words in a way that was different from how I had ever thought about them. It was like he kind of preached putting the sound of the word first ahead of the meaning, and it had me just
Mm.
thinking phonetically about all this stuff that I don't know, it felt to me like a whole new kind of dimension opened up there. And I mean, like I said, I ever since I was a kid, I love to read. I read intensely. And so getting this kind of like it was I don't know how to describe it, but it was just like a new way to read, and I just wanted to take more classes. I walked out of there just thinking, yeah, I could give this a try. I I didn't read much contemporary fiction back then, or
Yeah.
contemporary poetry. I didn't know like just the life I was coming from and where I live and where I was. Like it just didn't even really occur to me that people were novelists in 2015 or whatever
Yeah, isn't
year that
that
was.
true though? It feels like they're these old gods that like
Yeah,
just send
yeah,
things down and they appear on bookshelves, right? Like it's
exactly. Yeah,
so I used to be, I mean, I was like, as a kid, I was always, if I was missing, I was in the library and
yeah.
it just was such a, I don't know, just way to connect with the world and feel like the world was bigger than the town you lived in. And it was
Hmm.
just, but it did, it really felt like I was telling someone this recently, but like now that I get the honor of getting to talk to some of my favorite authors, it's crazy to walk into a bookstore and be like, oh, I know that person and I know that person. I'm like, wait, I can't believe these people are even alive, much less
Yeah.
like that's so cool. Yeah, that's amazing though. I love hearing that about that class. It's so crazy how life kind of takes us on these twists and turns where you don't know what's going to shape the next move and change everything. And
Yeah, and thank God, because I don't think I would have been a very good doctor.
you might have been an excellent doctor.
Maybe.
I saw an interview somewhere where you said something like you didn't think you were a very disciplined person or something like, or that I can't remember if it was discipline or I don't know what it was, but I was like, I think you have to be really disciplined to be a writer. I was like,
Yeah, I mean, I'm only disciplined in things I want to do. Like when I want something, then I'm doing it with discipline, and then everything else I just half-ass, so to
right,
speak.
you're like very focused on the thing that you're doing. Do you, any plans to write a poetry book any day soon, considering your
Um,
additional love for poetry?
no, my wife wants me to. She thinks I'm a very good poet, but I've kind of lost faith in my poetry chops. I'm out of practice.
Why have you
Um,
lost faith?
well, just because I'm out of practice, I haven't done it in a while, and
Yeah, but come on, that's like riding a bike. Like I mean, listen, you can't write things like this. I was sweating from fear, which was crowding the inside of my heart. Tell me that's not poetry. Come on. Come on, my
yeah, I mean,
friends.
I you kind of it's nice to be able to dip in and out of poetry, like in a novel. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
There's a little less pressure, but something about just how few words there are in a poem and like the way it sits on a page with all that white space, everything's tensions are high. The
That's
pressure's on, you know?
very true. That is very, very true. Is your wife the recipient of any of your poetry? Is she?
Yeah, of
That's
course.
good.
Yeah, when like we first started dating, I was taking that class,
Mm.
and I was just like, I learned a new skill, how to write poetry, and so I was just writing her poems like crazy.
Well, it worked. She's now
Yeah,
your
it
wife.
did. Yep.
I definitely I would not call myself a poet, but my husband has received some poetry in the past. So,
There you go.
I have dipped into that little corner of romance in my life.
Yeah, you got to do it. I don't know. Sometimes it's hard to express yourself just eye to eye, and you got to kind of hide behind the page.
Yeah. Well, it also lets people enter it, right? Like it lets
Yeah.
people sort of I would say that about uh visual stuff that's stylized. It's like
Yeah.
sometimes when you have that little bit of style, it gives the audience member or the reader space to project themselves into that space. So,
Wow, that's very smart. Yeah.
but it's true. I mean, you're talking about all the white space on the
Yeah.
page. That space on the page is for the person reading it to put themselves, it's like
Yeah.
it's maybe a little less intimidating when you're asking the reader to show up and fill the
Yeah.
space, because I don't know. Anyway, that's my theory and my sort of sneaky encouragement for you to write a book of poetry because I feel like it would be pretty
I gotta
kick-ass.
try and write another novel first.
Do you have an idea for one?
Yeah, I'm like working towards it. I was up early this morning trying to do it. I work in construction, and so kind of trying to write a novel centered in the construction industry
That's
in
cool.
Florida. Yeah,
Is there a lot of I would think there's probably a lot of construction in Florida. I don't know why
yeah,
that feels like the truth to me, but
it is the
I'm making
truth.
that up.
Well, it's like a crazy boom time right now, which you know is good for someone that works in it, but it's bad for someone that's trying to write a novel because I'm just so busy, you
Yeah,
know.
I was gonna say, when do you write? I mean, what does a day look like for you when you're trying to balance construction with writing?
Well, so that's the issue, Jennifer, is that I don't really have the time. I wake up at 5 and try and like go for 2 hours and then get ready and go to work like at to be there at 7:30.
Wow.
So, but I don't know, it's not really conducive to honestly, maybe it's conducive to poetry. A little 2-hour break, write a
Right, see?
poem, you know? All right.
Maybe that's why we're having
I'm
this
starting to see
conversation,
something.
David.
Yeah. But it's not very conducive to a novel. I've got like I just have 20, 30,000 words of like disjointed stuff right now that I've just been scribbling down in the mornings before work. I got to just take some time off and try and see what's there, put it all together.
Yeah. When you were originally writing All Day is a Long Time, which is just such a perfectly titled book for what your characters are going through.
Thank you.
But when did you have like the seed idea for that? I know you said you were in grad school at the time, but like where did that sort of, the shape of that start to come into focus of like, okay, this is the novel that I'm going to write.
Yeah, I was in grad school and I started it, for an assignment for class. I
Mm,
started writing the prologue basically with the idea to turn it into a novella. And then it grew and grew, and um, I kept getting, little hints, like I was saying when I was applying to schools, and I got into more fiction than I did poetry. So I was like, I'll just take that as a hint.
mm,
Um, when I had written the prologue, I sent it to a fellowship and a summer scholarship at a writers conference, and I like the committees liked it, and I was like, well, that might be a sign. I didn't know how to feel about it, but I was getting external sort of validation from
yeah.
my professors and from these people. Um, and so I was like, I guess I should just keep trudging on this. Yeah.
That's cool. And so as you were going through it, I mean, I know there's some stuff that you've pulled from your own life experience, but it's also the whole thing is its own story.
Hmm.
Did you have like an outline where like I'm always so curious about writers' process because everybody's so different. Some people are really regimented and then some people are sort of intuitively following a character. And what does that
Yeah.
process look like for you?
I would say for me, yeah, with this book, it was definitely the latter, I think if you're writing like a tightly plotted book, then you kind of have to be regimented in a way. But if you're writing kind of what I wrote, which is like almost meditative, kind of frantic and jumping around, then I think, yeah, it made sense for me to just kind of follow intuition, to just sit down and start writing about something that was on my mind or that was interesting to me that day, or like and see kind of where it led and where it landed.
Yeah. And did you have a process with like when you were writing this? Did you have publisher or an editor that you were already working with, or you wrote the whole thing and then sort of found someone to edit or
So yeah, so I wrote it. I wrote the whole thing. I had sent the prologue that I'd written to the guy who would eventually become my agent. I met him at this writers conference, and so he was like, "Yeah, write a book, man. Like, send it to me. We'll sell it." And I was like, "Thanks," and then kind of like got to work, and it took a couple years, but eventually I sent it to him, um, and then he sent it out to publishers, and he sent it to Pilar Garcia Brown, who ended up buying it and became my editor for the text. So.
and what was that relationship like? I'm so curious about that because I feel like it doesn't get talked about that often of like the back and forth between a novelist and an editor and just I know for me like anything that I've written or worked on or it's like such a huge collaboration over time of like who has input and whose notes actually are meaningful to me versus the notes that are sort of
Yeah.
like what? It's like it seems like it's got to be such an intimate relationship.
Yeah, she was great, and I was a little nervous going in. I didn't know what to think. I'm like, yeah, I don't really know much about it in reality. You only see these, or I only see these sort of like editor and writer dynamics play out like in TV and stuff.
Right.
But so like in real life, I didn't know what to expect, and I didn't know, oh, is she gonna try and cut all the stuff I like, and I gotta fight. But she
Mhm.
won my trust very early. Um, she really, she and I had the same mentality that like we're just trying to make this book, as tight and as powerful as it can be, and we worked towards that end. And she helped me a lot.
That's really cool. As many of you know, I love my coffee. I love it in the morning. I love it after lunch. I love it after dinner. I've even been known to take my coffee in the shower with me, which my husband thinks is really weird. But he recently introduced me to Amigo Coffee Roasters, a farm roasted coffee brand from El Salvador that's on a mission to improve coffee's traditional supply chain and give back to our friends who make it all possible. Amigo wants you to join their mission to seek quality and accountability in coffee in our communities and in our world. Visit www.amigoroasters.com, learn about their mission, but more importantly, you can support them by making a purchase. And for all you listeners, they have been kind enough to give you a 15% discount. Just go to www.amigoroasters.com and use the code Jen's Bookshelf at the checkout. This might be like a weird question, but especially because of the journey that the character David goes through in the novel, um, and sort of where he arcs to in terms of starting to decide where he's going to find value in life. At least that's what it sort of feels like to me.
Hmm.
Did you have a sense once you saw your ending coming, did you have a sense of what you were hoping a reader would feel as they were finishing it, or like questions you wanted them to have, or like a
Yeah,
conversation you were looking to provoke?
I uh, I wrote the ending. Like I wrote what would become the ending. I wrote this whole thing pretty out of order, but I wrote the ending around the middle.
Mm.
Um,
Oh, that's
when I was
fascinating.
Yeah, when I was writing, I was kind of doing what I'm doing now, which is like writing in spurts, having an idea, maybe following that for a week or so, seeing where it goes, how it kind of ties into the other ideas, the other things I've been writing. But I wrote the ending, that last scene, and was like, I think that's it. I think I found it because I mean, for up until then, I was like, how am I going to end this? What
Mm.
do I do? Um, just kind of getting ahead of myself. And then once I had that, I was like, all right, well now I have to like, you know, uh, earn it, so to speak. I had to just
But
had
that's
to
kind
get
of
there.
cool. Like I've never actually
Yeah,
heard that. So it's interesting because like listen, I can try to relate to it through my own experiences. It's just like sometimes when you're shooting a movie to shoot the last scene first can feel intimidating, but is
yeah,
sometimes really great because you know what you're aiming for and like you just said, what you have to earn. Like that's such an interesting way to think about writing something that's so overwhelming as a novel, I would imagine. to kind of be like, okay, this is where we're aiming, and so how do we get there?
Yeah, and something I really liked about the ending and kind of I guess speaking to like what I want people to feel or whatever is that we this character is he's like Mr. Doom and Gloom, um and I just feel like in he's had a lot of bad stuff happen to him. You hear in the discourse at large, like people talk about buried
Mm,
trauma, buried memories, all this pain that's like under the surface. But I that ending of like buried beauty and like a
mm.
repressed beautiful memory coming out. I don't know. I kind of wanted to bring some of that feeling to the end.
Yeah, well, I mean, I definitely felt that. It was such an interesting thing to experience memory in such a active way through the novel. It was like as David starts to unpack some of that repressed stuff, the bad and eventually the good, but it was like this active way to start moving towards something, which is the opposite of how people normally use memory. Like memory often is kind of pulling people backwards, not propelling them
Yeah,
forwards, which is it was just a really interesting thing to experience memory through a novel in a way that felt like an engine as opposed to like I
yeah,
don't know, like a
progressive
lag.
progression.
You know what I
Yeah,
mean?
absolutely.
It was really cool.
Yeah.
Um what's I don't know, like what's interesting to you right now? I know you're doing construction. I know you
Construction is
just got
not.
married? Did you just get married or you've been married for a while?
I just got married
Just got
in
married.
June.
And how did that go? Was it
It
amazing?
went it went amazing. I was nervous not to be married, but to get married. Like
Uh-huh.
weddings, the idea of being like front and center at a wedding has kind of been terrifying to me for a while, but
I eloped, so I hear you.
yeah, well, we didn't. We wanted to have the whole thing.
Yeah.
And I was really scared, but I had a great time, and
Ah.
I'm happy. Like I had known for a while, honestly, that I wanted to be married, but the hang up for me was the wedding itself. It's just I
But
don't
you
know.
did it.
You
You
want
got through it.
to sit at that little table and everyone stares at you. But it was a lot of fun. I really had a great day, and then we went on our honeymoon, and it was perfect. So
Oh, that's
happy guy.
amazing.
Yeah,
So yeah, I mean, like what's as you've entered married life and you're doing construction and you have a successful novel and you're thinking about your next novel, like what's I don't know, like what's interesting to you right now? Like what ideas I feel like you talk a lot about ideas in your novel. So that's what's prompting the question is like,
yeah,
times when David's like thinking about thinking and like wondering where thoughts start. And I mean, like I totally, I've had those conversations. Like I remember being in like high school and saying to my sister, like, "Do you ever think about thinking about thinking about thinking, and then you're still thinking about thinking? Like it doesn't ever
yeah,
end?"
yeah. I actually this is just kind of an aside, but we went to France for our honeymoon,
Hmm.
and we spent most of the time in the south, but we went to Paris at the end, and I'd never been to Paris,
Oh
and
wow.
like we did all the stuff, the normal stuff, and then I convinced my wife to go to this museum where they have Descartes' skull.
What?
Yeah, it's like on display. I like saw it and I was
What?
we got to go check this out,
How is that
please.
even possible?
Yeah, I don't know. I guess he gave it to science. And it's a really bizarre museum, and it's not in there's no English, and like I don't really speak French. I took some little lessons before I got there, but so I'm like, trying to read all the little signs, and I mean, it was an anthropological museum, but at one point, yeah, Descartes' skull is just sitting there, and I got to stare at it. I have a whole thing with Descartes in the book, and speaking of thinking about thinking,
Yeah.
he's the godfather of thinking about thinking, and so I don't know. That was really cool. I just had like
What is this museum? I
it's
just
called
can't.
Musée de l'Homme, just the Museum of Man.
Okay.
It's
And
I was It's
It sounds
honestly,
like the
it's
right
like there's
place to
some
have Descartes'
questionable.
skull.
Yeah, exactly. There's some questionable stuff in that museum that is like, I don't know, but that part was very cool to me. And his skull was tiny,
Oh, he's a little head.
little
I think
head,
people were
little head.
smaller back then. Like, I think
Yeah,
somehow it's probably all of the, I don't know, crap that's in the food that we eat. It's making us all
yeah,
become giants.
yeah. Well, he was a little guy. He accomplished a lot with that little skull, man. Um, Other than that, I'm like almost done with this great book called "When We Cease to Understand the World."
Oh, that's a
Um,
cool title.
yeah, it is. It's reading a translated version of it. I believe its original language is in Spanish,
Uh-huh.
um, but it kind of follows just like fictionalized accounts of these very famous scientists of the 20th century
Hmm.
their various contributions to scientific thought. It's a really interesting book, and it's kind of um, it's it's not exactly very happy. It's kind of about these guys' inventions, being used to nefarious ends in the
Mm.
most parts. It's the first whole section is about the guy that discovered cyanide.
Oh,
Uh,
geez.
yeah, and he got it from dyes apparently, like indigo dye.
Hmm.
Uh, it's very interesting, but that's also kind of plays into like I'm thinking when I do construction, it's just like it's all math, and um, I just feel like sometimes I just feel like we're just me and my crew and all of the guys I work with are just like using math to pave over the world, and it's kind of freaky.
Oh, man. I'm so curious to see how you start there and where you end up in your next novel. If you start with "We're using
Yeah,
math to pave over the world," like that's a great starting point. That's a lot to
I
resolve.
agree. Yeah,
You
that's
have a
my
lot to
jumping off point.
tackle.
Like I bought this book called The History of Mathematics that like starts with day one, like it starts with p- people a million years ago, not really a million, but a
Yeah,
bunch of
yeah,
years
a
ago
lot of years
coming up
ago.
with the number one and the number two and the number three. Apparently it took a long time to get for a long time there were only three numbers, one, two, and then more than two. But
More
it's
than two.
yeah, that's the third number, and that covers the rest of it. Um, but so from there to where we're at now, it's a big leap, and I'm only like 150, 200
That could be
pages
a
in.
good title though, David. More than two.
That is, yeah. I'll have to credit you. That's pretty good.
But so hang on, for someone who doesn't know a ton about construction, explain to me the way math is so connected to construction. I mean, I can sort of guess in some ways, but like break it down for me, like a day in a construction site and exactly how your brain is doing the math to achieve what you need to achieve.
Okay, yeah. Well, so I used to um, basically just like do carpentry, framing, trim, building decks and stuff.
Okay.
And then there it's sort of easy math. It's like, you know, how many piers do I need to hold the weight of this deck? How long is my cut here? How long is my cut there? 45-degree angle or vice versa. Framing is sort of easy. And then lately I've been like doing more management stuff where I'm ordering concrete, having to do, figure out the cubic yards of concrete we need to pour a
Oh,
footer and a slab
sure.
over here. And then everything has to be signed off by engineers and architects. That's who kind of gives me the plans. Um, and they're all just sitting behind a desk doing math all day,
And it,
calculating
it sounds kind of like an
loads and
SAT question or something. Like if you need this
yeah,
many cubic feet of cement and this many, like, yeah, like well, how
yeah, yeah.
many does yeah.
It's a whole thing. And then yeah, it's like uh we recently I don't know, I won't bore you. I won't
It's not
spoil anything.
boring. I asked the question. Like this
Yeah,
this is to me this is the stuff that's interesting is like listen, you can have people sit and tell, like read your book back to you for an hour or tell you how many, sentences they love, which I mean I have a whole list of sentences I love, but I feel like it's way more interesting to get to know like the heartbeat of the person who made every decision about every single word. It's like that all of that is impacted by what your life is and the math that you're doing at work. And,
Yeah.
and not, more than two is going to be all about this. So I'm going to get the scoop ahead of time.
Yeah, and well, I would like to I feel like I'm giving my job I'm making it sound too interesting. I hate my job.
I love it. You hate your job.
I
You
hate
hate
my job.
fiction.
I wish I could write all the time, I just wish I didn't have to do this
You'll get
stuff.
there. You
Yeah.
will. But also like it seems like you're also mining ideas and like thoughts and stories. And I'm sure there's great characters around you. And
Yeah. There sure are. And well, another thing that I was thinking, I started getting like pretty into playing blackjack, which I'm over now. But I mean, that's all numbers too.
it
I would
only
go from like
concerns me because of your past. Like
yeah, it's concerning. Everyone else was concerned too, as well as myself. But, I was like going from the job site to the blackjack table, and it's like, man, I'm just doing math two different ways now, you know?
that's true. That
And
is
yeah.
true.
Oh,
It seems right though. I mean, if you have a mind that thinks in sort of an obsessive way, it feels like you're, gravitating towards things that will feed your mind,
yeah, it's true.
which makes a lot of sense. The other thing that I really found reading the book that I'm curious if it was intentional or not. Maybe it was just that you're like soaking it all in because it's just the nature of the world we're in right now. But reading a novel about addiction, having not been an addict, I still felt really connected to David and the characters around him. And I felt I really related to like moments of feeling outside of things and moments of feeling like the sensitivities were super high. And it started making me think about how like social media can make people feel, or like Twitter and Instagram and like all these, where it's like this constant sort of like noise, that in a way sort of felt like David's brain in the book, of like his mind and his sensitivities, and like this overstimulation was sort of constantly creating a tension within him that he was always working through. And at some point, I can't remember exactly what passage it was, I was like, oh, this is interesting because this sort of feels almost like not only is it the story, David's story on a practical level, but it also feels sort of metaphorically touching on some of the stuff that's just going on in the world right now. Was that something that felt intentional, or?
Yeah, I would say, it definitely it became clear to me too as I was working on it. I don't know if I set out to do it, but like that very idea of
Mm,
just I don't know. I mean, so I haven't touched a drug in a very long time. I'm very far removed from like that psychosis brought on by a week of no sleep and lots of chemicals in your body. So I kind of yeah had to lean on confusions, just
yeah,
ratcheting up regular confusions, everyday confusions to kind of get to that place, um, and to fill in the gaps between whatever I may have been thinking then or have thought about what I was thinking then or whatever. But yeah, it's that bombardment of like of just information when you can't synthesize it, which I feel like does happen quite a bit now, when there's just so much stimulus or
yeah.
stimuli. Um,
Well,
yeah,
and
and it
also,
can get
David he was seeing the world through the lens of needing the drugs to feel better, or to feel what he was after. Well, either try to not feel or try to feel more, it seems. And yet, like, that affects the way he digests, quote
yeah,
unquote, the truth, right? So if we're all seeing the world through these different lenses of what we need in every given moment, or what our own primal nature is like after in any given moment, that kind of dilutes or sort of unravels the idea of truth, right? So it felt like there was something really unnerving about reading through, reading the perspective of someone's lens, really unraveling the truth in that
yeah.
way. You know what I mean? Like it was, and I was like, oh, this is a familiar feeling. This is like how I feel when I open my phone and the headlines don't add up, or, or like,
Yeah.
you start seeing all these factions of people having comments or opinions on things that you're like, wait, what, but what's the truth? And then, it gets more and more scary to feel like, well, is there truth? I don't know. I guess I'm saying all this because it feels a little bit like it's kind of the core of, I don't know, like the precipice that David seemed to stand on often in the novel of
Yeah.
like desiring a concrete truth. Like I can't remember I might have it here, but the passage where he like wants to lay down to feel the sturdiness of the ground and
Yeah.
yet is constantly creating sort of chaos at the same time. And he's like, well, do I want stability or do I want chaos? And it's like, well, I think he wants the truth, but what is the truth? Like, was that sort of the intention, or am I just projecting?
No, I mean, it definitely was the intention of this character to be, yes, not just completely. It was a what really stuck out to all my experiences in and out of institutions and just kind of all this stuff. And I think I do a good job of explaining in the book is just this people trying to explain to you what you're all about. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
and sort of being like, maybe, but maybe not. Like I don't know, something feels missing.
Yeah.
And just kind of being stuck in that place, yeah, like of not knowing and honestly, I don't know any more about it than I did when I was 19, it
Yeah.
just some things you can't know and sometimes yeah, you just have to feel it. And yeah, I started reading, obviously, as I was writing the book, I got into reading like about what certain drugs, like what they tell you they actually do to like, on a molecular level to your brain or
Oh,
whatever.
wow.
And yeah, that was one of the things that I was very interested in was this sort of the gasoline that these drugs he's doing like put in his brain about like you got a brain that naturally seeks patterns and it starts to if it's kind of going haywire, it starts to see patterns where there are no patterns, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
um and that feeling of him just being stuck there, and I think in that way where it's like drawing patterns out of almost, a lack of patterns or whatever, there's something similar to be said for just like getting bombarded with information and being unable to find any sort of pattern to it,
Mm.
which is how I feel on the internet most of the time. Where
Yeah.
it's just like,
Yeah.
this is a lot. I'm thinking it's just too much or whatever. And
Yeah.
how do I synthesize these ideas together? What is the link here? And sometimes it can make you feel like, yeah, you haven't slept in a few days.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. I mean, I can only speak from my own experience, but I'm someone who, like, if something doesn't seem to add up, if I can at least get to the thing behind the thing, you know what I mean? Where
Yeah.
it's like, where whether it's like in a friendship where it's like, wait, why would that person say that? That doesn't match who I believe them to be. And then you go, oh, I didn't know that this happened and that created that. It's
Yeah,
like
yeah.
there's this, I find some sort of peace for myself to like be able to kind of like go like, okay, if something doesn't make sense, there's always something there's like a piece of information missing, right? But the truth
Yeah,
is like,
yeah,
we're in a world right now where there's a lot of things that are never going to make sense. It's like,
yeah. Throwing that up, yeah.
I just wonder though, like, I wonder if we're going to get to a place as human beings where we're going to expand to be able to digest what's coming at us now, like, because like we went through the, the craziest shift since like the combustion engine, like since
Mhm.
like the industrial revolution, basically going from like horses and walking everywhere to like suddenly like cars, automobiles, airplanes, all that stuff. And so it's like it was such a huge leap that we had no time to adjust to. Like, I wonder if we're gonna like over time get to a place where we can expand to be able to hold the entire world's bad news within us. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, you know what I'm saying? It's like, cause
I
you
I
know,
think I think, yeah, we're kinda developing or, like, yeah, attempting to develop ways to do that. You've got, yeah, people are just experimenting new ways to deal with all this cascade of information, either by denial or wallowing or inventing sort of like conspiracy theories about it. There's just like, yeah, there's a lot of ways to deal with it. I wonder, I don't know if what it will morph into. But
yeah,
I feel like I
we do
understand what you're
seem,
saying.
yeah, it's like we seem to eventually expand to be
Yeah,
able to like digest what the world is giving us. So like
yeah,
it's just interesting to wonder if like we're gonna, whatever, 3 or 4 generations from now, they're gonna look back at us and be like, oh my gosh, remember when people couldn't handle this and now we're fine,
yeah.
or the world might end, one or the other. But I have a lot of faith in the humanity's ability to continue like adjusting and surviving. Both as an actor and as a director, sleep is super important and really hard to get because our schedules are never the same. Sometimes we start at 4 in the morning, sometimes we start at noon, sometimes we start at midnight and we work all night. So it's really important to find a way to fall asleep whenever I need to fall asleep. And I finally found a solution. I found Beam Dream Powder. It's incredible. Not only do they have incredible flavors and it works and it helps me sleep, but I wake up feeling super rested and refreshed and ready to go. There is a reason that the top business people and top athletes in the world are also using Beam Dream Powder. And I reached out to them and they have been super kind and have offered a discount for any of our listeners. So if you go to shopbeam.com/Jen's Bookshelf, you can get a discount. Get 35% off a subscription or 15% off a one-time purchase. Just use the code Jen's Bookshelf. Sleep has never tasted better.
Yeah, I do too. And something I remind myself of when I find myself getting like too, I don't know, when technology feels overwhelming to me or something like that, is that I took a course in college called it was like about it was about technology and linguistics. I don't remember how this what I'm about to say tied in, but I remember them saying that when the phonograph was first invented, um, everyone was like in a moral panic about it because they thought it was going to mean the end of like people coming together and caroling together in the town square.
This is
Um,
amazing.
and yeah, I mean, it did mean
But
the
at
end
the
of it.
time, this was probably a huge upsetting thing. It was
Yeah, it
disruptive.
was. But I don't miss caroling. I don't want to carol. So I'm actually okay with how it ended up.
You don't miss strangers knocking at your door and singing at you for a while?
I don't have a very good singing voice, but yeah.
That's amazing. But it's true. I mean, we right now, I don't know how aware the whole world is of it, but living in LA, it's all we talk about right now. But we have huge strikes going on with the Writers Guild
Yeah,
and
of
also with the actors. And
course.
um, it's one of these wild times where I keep saying it's like it goes back to like when we went from like silent films to talkies, and
Yeah,
all of a sudden everything was different, and certain people who used to be big stars were suddenly unemployable, and certain people who were, the
yeah,
writers for those things were suddenly didn't know how to write a talkie versus, so it's like there was this like huge like cataclysmic shift in the industry back then. And there's been other times that there's been close to that size of a shift, but that's the biggest one I can really think of. I mean, going from, I guess, black and white to color, going from like the studio system to the more like a tour driven filmmakers. Think there's just different
yeah,
time, video to DVD, from video to film, all that stuff. But or sorry, from film to video. But you know, it's just a weird thing when you are living through that sort of seismic shift of things,
yeah,
and it feels in the moment so I don't know, like nihilistic and emotional and dramatic, and And then, who knows what people will think when they look back on this 50 years from now, 100 years from now, and they're like, well, why were they so worried about AI? Or, like,
Yeah, yeah.
why, like, because in 50 to 100 years, AI is going to be whatever it is that we can't even imagine yet. And that'll be normal to people.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, obviously, I don't know all that much about the strikes and everything. I'm in a different world, but I didn't know about the AI stuff until like actually the other day I was reading some article and they're like, and yeah, people are worked up that within their contracts, it says people have rights to create AI renderings of them or something. I was like, holy shit, that's
Yeah.
crazy.
Well, yeah, and
Um,
it's just such a domino effect, right? Because it's like if someone can make a whatever a skin of you or whatever or a scan of you that they're calling skins,
mhm.
then they could put your face on all sorts of things. It's like then you're like really losing control over the way that you're presented to the world.
Yeah, and it's like one of those things where my personal view is like, there's nothing inherently evil or wrong about technology, but man, with every seismic shift, the powers that be will try to erode the rights of the less powerful.
A hundred
So yeah,
percent.
you gotta stay on your toes, man.
So crazy, huh?
Yeah.
I know someone was telling me the other day I was at this I was a delegate for the DGA convention when we were doing all the voting for the board and stuff, and I met another director who was just telling me that she had seen an interviewer interview an AI
Mhm.
and like was asked to mimic certain people's voices and could like exactly mimic all these voices. Like that's the other thing is like at what point is it plagiarism because technically they're just pulling content from the internet and mimicking it, right? So
Yeah.
it's like that would for us that would be like if you were to just take someone else's novel and say it was yours, that's plagiarism. It's like and yet an AI doesn't have those limitations. So it's just
Yeah.
isn't that weird to think about?
It really is. I mean, the thing that I kind of get solace from is like everything, you hear the headlines, like as a writer, like, man, AI is the future, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
But everything I've seen as like AI that AI has written, or like you like write this in the style of this, or write me a paper like this.
Yeah.
It's all like kind of it's missing something, man. It's kind
Yeah.
of it's
Yeah,
honestly
it's definitely not there yet.
it's worse than I would have thought it would be.
Yeah.
Like to me, as a
Right.
cynic or whatever, you think like, well, English is a language, it's governed by rules. A computer could obviously figure that out. This
Hmm.
is all just bits and information and like is synthesized in not that complex of a way compared to what a computer can do. But apparently not. I don't know. Like apparently it's
At
not
least
as good.
not yet. Not
Yeah,
yet.
not yet.
Yeah.
That's the
No,
idea.
someone put
But
I
man.
don't know. I'm not well versed enough in these things to know what it is, but someone put my like asked chat GPT or something like who I was. And it was like
Mhm.
hilarious what the reaction was because it had pulled every
Yeah,
apparently Jennifer Morrison is a very popular name. And I know that there's like a governor
I could
somewhere named
see that.
Jennifer Morrison. There's like a horse
Yeah.
person named Jennifer Morrison. There's a florist named, I mean, like I see them all on my,
David Sanchez also a pretty
very
popular name.
popular
Yeah.
name, yeah. And and so anyway, I put it in and it said something like that I was the highest paid actor in the whole world, which is so not
Good for
true.
you.
Yeah, I
Good
know. It's
for
like
you.
I that part I wish was true. And it listed some obscene number, like that I had made like $500 million, and that I also had like a burger franchise called Morson's Burgers, and that I
Whoa.
had a like a lingerie line called Morris Intimacy or something. It was so funny. I was like, I should start all of these things. This is so great. It was
Yeah.
just like plays on my last name for the names of all these companies. But yeah,
Yeah, I
I
mean,
don't know.
I feel like on Google there have been these like AI generated articles for everything where like you click on it and you read like a sentence and you're just like, this is gibberish, man. Like this
Yeah,
is computer
yeah,
just a
totally.
poorly programmed thing just like slapped these words together.
Yeah. Well,
I
I'm
don't know.
I'm with you. I'm hoping that we humanity, like the human side of everything is what ultimately is what's attractive about I don't know, art and storytelling and all of those things. I know we're getting close to at the end of our time, so I don't want to overstay my welcome, but my one question for you is there anything about this novel that you wish someone had asked you that no one has ever asked you? Like, is there something that you would love to share that, because I can only imagine you've been asked so many of the same questions over and over again. It's probably super annoying. Um, and I'm just curious if there's like any sneaky corners of things that you've always wished someone would ask you about.
That is a very good question. Um, but I can't think of anything. I'm sorry to let you
No, no,
down.
you're not letting me down at all. I just feel like, sometimes that's, it's happened to me before when I've worked on projects where I'm like, oh man, they ask me the same five questions and then they don't like really kind of dig into to what I would hope people would be interested in, So if there was something like that, I just wanted to give it a chance to come to the surface.
Yeah, I don't necessarily have anything to say about it, and I don't know. I mean, obviously I just feel like the sun is such a huge part of this book, and I
Mm,
think that that's kind of an interesting
yeah,
thing. Just like,
the
I live in
heat.
Florida. Yeah, it was just hot the whole time. I was just thinking about the sun, and I don't know. That was something where, as I was talking about, kind of sticking on an idea for a week and seeing what was in it and doing that kind of stuff, like that was something I realized after about a year of writing the book, is like, man, I'm writing about the sun a lot, or like something about light or daytime or something. Like it's just kind of touched every single thing. So
That's
um
interesting though. I mean, like obviously with a character who's like living through such a dark
yeah,
time, that the sun was so present, that this beacon of light was just sort of like waiting to be the center of his attention or something. I don't know.
yeah,
That's really cool. I like that.
yeah,
All
thank
right, well
you.
then the last little thing I would just I ask everybody this, and you can totally decline answering if it's annoying. It's just what you feel like a great piece of advice that was given to you at some point. It doesn't have to be about writing, it could just be about life. It could be about writing. But if there was, whether it was like in that class that kind of changed things for you, or someone you work with on a construction site, or like just any little tidbit of like great life advice that kind of that you that you feel like influences the way you, I don't know, that you carry with you in some way that's productive.
Man, I could use some advice right now. So maybe I need to get out and ask people this question
Yeah.
myself. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, for me, like the game changer for me in terms of like going from thinking and just saying I wanted to be a writer to actually becoming a writer was writing, was waking up very
Doing it.
early and just doing it. And that's like, it's, you know, it's not great advice. It's sort
It
of
is great
something that,
advice, so you got to
yeah,
just do
yeah,
it. Yeah.
it's only great if you do it. It's kind of stale. It's not very profound, but it's like, give it a try and see what happens.
Yeah, no, I like that. I mean, I recently had lunch with someone who was like wanting to get advice about stuff, and they were working on a project, and I said, "Okay, so like how long is the script?" And they were like, "Oh, I'm not done yet." I was like, "Okay, so how many pages do you have?" And they're like, "Oh, like 60." I was like, "Okay, well then finish the script."
Yeah, yeah,
They're like, "Well, yeah, no, but I mean, it just comes in fits and starts." I was like, but you don't have a thing until you finish it. You got to just
yeah,
do it. Like it can
yeah,
be terrible. It's okay. But just get that piece of clay and then deal with your clay. So I definitely, I hear you on that. And I think that it seems maybe like straightforward advice, but I think it's something that, I mean, I have to remind myself all the time. And I feel like the more honest we all are with each other about that, the faster we're going to have, special things in the world.
yeah. And I've always felt like the less I actually do of it, of writing, like the more anxiety I feel about it, the more insecure I feel about uh, being a writer, the more questions I have about whatever it is, like the work I'm actually working on. Just the less I do, the worse the whole experience gets, and
Mm.
the opposite is true. The more I do, like the more at ease I am with everything, the more like it just feels like I have a handle on it and am like, I don't know, making
Yeah.
progress in some ways.
Well, I hope that you get some time off or you get, a stretch of time because I genuinely cannot wait to read whatever you write next.
Thank you.
You have such a unique voice and it's memorable and it's very compelling. It definitely had me leaning forward. So,
Thank you so much, and thank
yeah.
you. This was a great talk, man. You were right. It
Yeah.
was cool and it was fun. So thanks a lot.
That's my goal. That's my goal. But thank you. Thank you so much for taking the time. And I know our listeners are going to be super excited to hear everything that we got to talk about. So, all right. Well, thank you. And let us know when you have more to share because we'll interview you again about your poetry book or, after two, more than two.
Yeah.
Um, thank you so much, David. We'll talk to you soon.
Thank you, Jennifer.